Okay, so get this. Today, we're diving headfirst into those, whoa, did that just happen moments.
Those Black Swan events, right?
Exactly. But not just the term itself. We're talking about really thinking about them the way Nassim Nicholas Taleb wants us to. You've mentioned some of your favorite sources on this, and let me tell you, this is going to be good. We're going straight to Taleb's own words from the Black Swan itself.
It's amazing how often we scramble to make sense of things after the fact.
Right.
Like our brains can't handle the sheer chaos of a true Black Swan until it's already blown over.
Totally. We crave that neat little story, don't we?
Absolutely.
But like Taleb says, even something like reading the newspaper every day, which you'd think would make you more informed, can actually backfire.
How?
Because it emphasizes all that day-to-day stuff while completely missing those huge, unpredictable forces that are really shaping things.
Oh, I see. Yeah. You get so caught up in the headlines that you miss the real story unfolding behind the scenes.
It's like trying to drive using only the rearview mirror.
Okay. I like that.
Useful for seeing where you've been, for sure,
Right.
but terrible for figuring out where you're going
Makes
next.
sense.
And that's where this idea of silent evidence comes in. All that stuff that doesn't make it into the history books or those big success stories.
It's like this whole graveyard of what ifs and could have beens, and it totally warps our whole view of how the world actually works.
Oh, totally. And it makes me think of that example Taleb uses about Giacomo Casanova.
Casanova. Oh, right, right. The infamous lover.
Yeah.
What about him?
What does he have to do with black swans? Well, tell me, what comes to mind when you think of Casanova?
Well, he was known for his risky lifestyle, let's say, and his luck with, well, everything, really. He was notorious for it.
Exactly. And he lived to tell the tale, right?
Yeah.
Which then just reinforced this idea that his choices were all part of some master plan.
When really it was probably more like a lot of lucky breaks and, yeah, some Black Swan events working in his favor.
Exactly. But all those other people who tried to follow his, shall we say, strategies and failed miserably, their stories, they're lost to history.
Creating this illusion that his success was somehow repeatable.
When in reality, luck played a huge role. A black swan, if you will.
It's like looking at a winning lottery ticket and assuming you can replicate the outcome.
And this bias, it's not just in our personal lives, right? Think about how many business schools are packed with case studies about wildly successful companies.
Right, analyzing everything they did right.
But how many more companies had almost the exact same strategy, but totally tanked?
They're stories. Nobody cares about those, so we never hear them.
It's like we're only learning from half the textbook.
Right, and it's not even a random half. It's the half that fits this narrative we already have.
Which brings us to Taleb's idea of these two domains, mediocristan and extremistan.
Mediocristan. I love how he names things. Okay, so mediocristan, if I remember correctly, is all about averages and those predictable outcomes, right?
Right. Think like height, weight, test scores, all that. You can apply the good old bell curve and get some fairly reliable predictions.
But extremistan,
Extremistan throws all that out the window.
no bell curves allowed.
It's the realm of book sales, stock markets, social movements. One single event, one black swan, can completely rewrite the average.
And here's the kicker. We try to use all these tools designed for mediocristan in extremistan.
Like trying to predict the next viral video based on what's been popular in the past.
Right. Or using historical data to predict stock prices.
It's completely ignoring the possibility of like a total paradigm shift
Yeah.
or a global pandemic that throws everything out of whack.
Speaking of things being thrown out of whack,
Yeah,
we've all heard of the narrative fallacy, but Taleb really digs into how deeply it messes with our ability to understand these unpredictable events.
oh, absolutely. Our brains, they crave a good story.
They're practically wired for it.
So we try to force fit order onto things even when it's not really there.
Like those conspiracy theories that pop up after every major event.
Right. Even if there's zero evidence to support them, we fill in the blanks with whatever makes the story feel complete.
It's comforting, I get it, but it's dangerous, especially when dealing with Black Swan events.
Because it can lead you to make decisions based on faulty information.
Exactly. And this isn't just about like global conspiracies or whatever. This shows up in our everyday lives all the time. We tell ourselves stories about why a project failed or, why we didn't get that promotion.
Instead of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, some things are outside our control.
Or that we just got unlucky this time.
But we create these narratives to explain the past, and then those same narratives can blind us to what might happen in the future.
Precisely. We think we're learning from experience when really we're often just reinforcing our existing biases.
And that's exactly how the narrative fallacy sets us up for a head-on collision with the Black Swan.
Hmm.
So how do we even begin to navigate a world where our brains are practically hardwired to misunderstand randomness?
Right, like we're set up to see patterns even where they don't exist.
Especially when so many of the tools we rely on, like our trusty bell curve, are designed for a much more predictable reality.
Oh, tell me about it. That's where Taleb's whole critique of the bell curve gets really interesting, I think. He calls it this, get this, great intellectual fraud.
And he's not wrong, is he? I mean, think about it. The bell curve is everywhere.
Everywhere. We use it to understand everything from, like you said, height and weight to the stock market.
Isn't that kind of obvious? I mean, the whole point of a black swan is that it falls outside the bell curve, right?
It seems obvious in retrospect, sure. But we keep falling into this trap of thinking it applies to areas where it so clearly doesn't.
Because we want it to. We crave that neat and tidy model.
Exactly. Take financial models, for instance. They often use the bell curve to assess risk.
And then, bam,
Ah.
a single black swan event, like a market crash or a global pandemic, throws the whole system into chaos.
The model goes right out the window because it was never designed to handle that kind of extreme event.
It's like, I don't know, using a ruler to measure the circumference of a circle.
I like that. The tool's just not built for that.
Exactly. So if the bell curve is so flawed, especially in extremistan, what's the alternative? What are we supposed to use instead?
Well, that's where things get a bit more complex. Taleb argues for a much more nuanced approach.
Okay, so walk me through this. What does that look like?
For starters, it means acknowledging the limitations of our existing tools.
So admitting that we don't have all the answers.
Exactly. And being open to the possibility of those extreme, unpredictable events. And he suggests exploring things like, for example, fractal geometry.
Fractals, like those trippy patterns that repeat at different scales.
Exactly.
What on earth do fractals have to do with black swans?
Okay, so think about it this way. Imagine a coastline. From a distance, it has a certain shape, right?
Sure, yeah.
But as you zoom in closer and closer, you start to see that same basic pattern repeating itself at smaller and smaller scales.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So instead of that smooth, predictable bell curve, we need a model that can account for these sudden jagged shifts and those unexpected cascades.
Exactly. Because fractals, they can help us visualize how these seemingly insignificant events can interact and amplify each other.
Leading to those black swan moments that catch us completely off guard.
Precisely. It's not about linear cause and effect. It's about these complex, interconnected systems where a small change can ripple outward in unpredictable ways.
This makes me think about how we typically assess risk. If we're too focused on those predictable bell curve events, we might be totally missing the real danger zones.
Absolutely. And that's a key takeaway here. Taleb wants us to shift our thinking from prediction to preparation.
So less about trying to predict the exact location and timing of an earthquake, and more about designing buildings that can withstand the tremors.
Exactly. It's about building robustness and resilience into our systems from the ground up.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we build those kinds of systems?
Well, think about something like a diversified investment portfolio. Instead of putting all your eggs in one basket and hoping that basket doesn't get hit by a black swan, you spread your risk across different asset classes.
So even if one area takes a hit, the others can kind of cushion the blow.
Exactly. It's about weathering the storm, not trying to prevent every single raindrop.
I like that. This whole discussion is making me realize that we often confuse knowledge with certainty.
Oh, that's so true. We assume that if we can just gather enough data, we can predict the future.
But just because we can't predict the future with 100% accuracy doesn't mean we're powerless, right?
Absolutely not. And that's where Taleb's idea of skeptical empiricism comes in.
Skeptical empiricism. Okay, break that down for me.
Right. He's not saying we should just throw our hands up in the air and give up. He's calling for a more grounded, more experimental approach to knowledge.
So less dogma and more, let's test it out and see what happens.
Exactly. Be skeptical of those grand theories and predictions, especially in areas where black swan events are more likely to occur.
Like trying to predict the next big technological breakthrough or something, right?
Precisely. Instead, focus on gathering real-world data, testing your assumptions, and being willing to adjust course as needed.
It's about being adaptable and, dare I say, open to being wrong.
Yes. And constantly learning from our experiences, both the successes and the failures.
Which is harder than it sounds, right? Our brains don't like to admit they're wrong.
No, they really don't. But that's how we learn and grow.
So we've talked about how serendipity, being in the right place at the right time, plays a role.
It's definitely a factor, but it's not just about blind luck.
Right, right. It's more about putting yourself in a position to get lucky.
Exactly. You create the conditions for those happy accidents to happen. Taleb uses this analogy of gardening, I think.
Oh, interesting. Okay. How does that work?
Well, you can't control exactly which seeds will sprout and thrive, right?
Yeah.
But you can cultivate fertile ground, plant a diverse range of seeds, and then kind of see what emerges.
So instead of betting everything on one specific outcome, you diversify, stay open to those unexpected possibilities. Is that what he means by the whole barbell strategy thing?
You got it. The barbell strategy is all about finding that balance, that sweet spot between security and speculation. You're hedging your bets, protecting your downside, but you're also leaving room for those high-impact, positive Black Swan events.
Okay, I'm all about a good barbell strategy, but how does that actually play out in the real world? Give me an example.
Sure, imagine you're like, I don't know, managing a research and development team, right? A barbell approach there might be investing, say, 80% of your resources in those proven incremental innovations, stuff you're pretty sure is going to pan out. That forms the safe side of your barbell.
Okay, got it. So you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You're making sure there's this steady stream of smaller wins. But what about the other 20%?
Right.
That's where things get interesting, right?
Exactly. You take that remaining 20% and you throw it at those wild, out there ideas, the ones that have the potential to be total game changers.
So you're simultaneously protecting your downside while also holding out for those high-impact, unpredictable wins. It's like, I don't know, having a safety net but also keeping a telescope handy.
I love that because you never know when that next big opportunity is going to appear on the horizon, and then bam, you're ready to pounce.
This has been, I've got to say, kind of a mind-bending deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from how Black Swan events challenge our assumptions about predictability, to risk, to even our own ability to learn from the past.
It really makes you question everything you thought you knew about how the world works.
Right. But the thing is, Taleb, he doesn't want to leave us paralyzed by uncertainty. If anything, his ideas, they give us this framework, a way of thinking about a world where the unexpected is not just possible, it's inevitable.
He's basically handing us the tools to navigate this landscape, saying, hey, look, you can't predict every twist and turn, but you can be prepared for them.
We've got to embrace humility, acknowledge that we don't have it all figured out. We've got to be open to being wrong, especially when it comes to those grand narratives and predictions that make us feel safe.
Because those narratives can really trip us up.
Totally. And we need to move beyond those comforting, but often misleading bell curves. It's time to embrace the messy, unpredictable reality of extremistan.
Because that's where the black swans live.
They sure do. And while we can't control when and where those black swans will land, we can control how we respond to them, the choices we make in their aftermath. So as you go about your day, remember that the future is not something to be feared, it's something to be shaped.
So get out there, embrace the black swan, cultivate some serendipity, and don't be afraid to make a few waves along the way.
Who knows? You might just create the perfect conditions for a black swan of your own.